Okay, welcome everyone to the April 2023 Microsoft 365 Modern Management Meetup. So this week, or this month, I should say, it's an online only event. So you'll notice that there are no luxurious views out of Microsoft's high level building windows over in North Sydney looking across the harbour. So yes, unfortunately, yeah, you've got a few of our faces a bit closer than they were the last couple of times. So just a quick introduction from me. I'm Mark O'Shea. We've got a few things that we'll sort of cover off tonight. I won't spend too much time here on intros because I don't think we've got too long a session overall tonight. So we can, probably don't need to dwell on things for too long, but I'll throw over to you, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve. You can find me on Twitter at OnPremCloudGuy. And yeah, I'll hand over to, I'm assuming, Ben, because don't think Jeroen's here yet.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ben. Also things on the screen. And Jeroen is not here because he doesn't love us, or scheduling is weird.
Yeah, no, he did actually have family duties that he had to deal with.
Nice.
Which I'm guessing probably involves him eating breakfast as well. So, I like missing meals is something that should be questioned when you're asked to do that. Okay, so Jeroen should be here shortly, we hope. So just in terms of today's topic, I wanted to sort of keep it pretty straightforward and pretty simple rather than sort of having a few smaller topics. There are other random things we can have over the next few months, but this month we really want to focus on one particular element of Intune Suite. We wanted to talk about the endpoint privilege management. And the reason why that's the one that we're going to focus on is it's probably, I don't know if this is the correct wording I should use, but out of the new things that have become available, I think EPM is probably the most real of the bunch right now. Is that an appropriate thing? Yeah, is it? I don't know if it's the way it would be worded, but but there's a few other things that we'll sort of cover off as as a lead into part of that Intune Suite conversation. But just before we do switch over and get into that, just to see if there's anyone who is new, who hasn't joined before, who just wants to drop a comment into chat or unmute just to do a quick introduction.
No pressure, but we are taking notes.
Ben, where did that text come from that you just pasted into chat?
Don't attribute that.
I'm not attributing it to anyone. I just think it's very funny.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things related to that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Not the wording that's not really the way that I would position it. I've got my own view of that.
Yeah, no, it's just an interesting conversation starter, I think, because there's a lot of people with strong opinions on how it's been rolled out, and I think that's probably the funniest one.
Yeah, it's definitely very different. There's some more. Yeah, I've got to be careful with some of the wording here because there are definitely some alarm bells with some of the positioning. So it's definitely quite different. So Homer, welcome from Netherlands.
Welcome.
Thanks. Good evening. It's morning for me, so.
It is.
It is.
Good morning.
So do you actually know Jeroen, or you just follow him on Twitter?
I know Jeroen in person. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. So you've met him however many times you've met him. That's that number.
I think the
more
last
than
time I met him was in Norway even. So because we were both there for a customer. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Well,
I usually run into him on events. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So anyone else sort of jumping in? Also, welcome back, Aresh. Good to see you again. So I was curious if you'd be turning up.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking at some of the other people who popped up in chat. So yeah, we've got a good number tonight. Okay, so let's so let's start off then just by jumping into, just Intune Suite at a top level. So I'll start off just by going through some of the official Microsoft links and documentation, because that sets the stage for some of the things that we will versus what we won't talk about. Because there's, some of the things that are part of it have been widely discussed. There are, certain things where, there's a lot of detail available about how certain things work and what's in the pipeline, etc. But in other cases, there have been things that have just really been part of the initial announcement that haven't then been just mentioned, I think is probably a fair word after that. So I've kind of just sort of put it into 3 categories here, so we can just start off just at a high level and take a quick look here. But starting off just with, the announcement, what's available now, and what's coming. So the good news is the what's coming stuff is in the M365 roadmap. So we don't need to try to, piece it together from, basically from Intune documentation and from blog posts, etc. So that's good that that's there. So let me just grab. Actually, I've got the links over in the browser ready to go. So I'll just sort of drop the first one in, so we can just go through. So some of this is just going to be boring stuff, especially for those of you who've already been through it. But here we just sort of get I guess, really what the first public discussion was around, what is the Intune Suite? So the thing that we're going to be focusing on in here is not remote help. We sort of covered that one when it was first, I think it was when it went GA, was when we went through and we covered that off. The one we're going to be focusing on here is endpoint privilege management. Now, some of the things that are nice about this, especially in the preview form, is that it's really easy just to go into your tenant and activate it. There's no licensing requirement. You're not signing up for anything. It's just a preview that you're enabling in there. So it's kind of an easy one for you to jump in and see how it works. And what you'll notice after we sort of spend a bit of time demonstrating this is that it's something that's actually going to be quite easy for people to go through and deploy, etc., if they're licensed for it. Now, some of the other things where, if we sort of take a look, things like the advanced endpoint analytics, a lot of what's there is stuff that is in the road. We'll sort of talk, we'll jump out to the roadmap, so you'll see some of that stuff is being mentioned out there. But then some of the other things that we sort of get as part of Intune Suite, it's kind of weird where it's so actually, and I think one of the pages we'll jump out to later will sort of explain it a little bit better. I thought I had a link to it in here. Oh yeah, it's the next one where some of this stuff will hopefully make a little bit more sense and we can have a bit of a conversation around it. Now, once we get down to this section, this is where we start seeing some of the things that we're just really not going to spend too much time on. So we've got one slide of things that we can talk about with advanced app management. So that's something that is coming, but I don't know if there are any public dates around that even for preview. I don't think that is one that is in the roadmap. Now the other one as well, which kind of falls into that same situation, is using Intune for cloud certificate management. So this is basically the only information, or you might find a little bit more than this, but you're not going to find much at all about that cloud cert management piece. So this is something that obviously there's quite a bit of work that has to go into that, because you come up with an idea of what a cloud certificate management solution should be, but then you find that there's once you start talking to customers and partners about it, no doubt I would guess here especially that they would have been absolutely overwhelmed with feedback about must-have features for when the product shipped in order to be considered to be used. Now, with things like advanced app management, really the big challenge here would be, actually, I shouldn't say the big challenge, but probably the big thing here, at least initially, is deciding what apps are actually covered by this. And and that's something that's kind of easier to expand over time. Whereas the functionality that people expect a cloud certificate solution to have, let's just leave cloud and management. Let's just say a certificate solution. Everyone or every org is going to have a very specific set of requirements that they have here. And for something to sort of come in and say, this is something that's in the cloud, therefore it's not going to do all the things that your on-prem solution has been doing for years. If those are things that you still need, it's going to be a bit of a challenge to try to get people to go down that path. Okay, now just sort of switching quickly here over to just talking about Intune Suite add-on capabilities. So what I just want to focus on down here, there's a bunch of other random stuff that's on this slide, but all I want to do is focus on this table because it's something that's worth just spending a few minutes on here because this is incredibly different to the way, to what a P2 or like Plan 2 or P2 option would be with other Microsoft products. So, so normally you'd be going, okay, well, obviously P2 is better than P1 or the standalone. And it's like, well, only if you need those particular capabilities. It's not something where, if you look at this option here for the specialized devices management, like that's something that, like, if you've got devices that fall into that category, then yeah, Plan 2 is fine. But what I can really see happening here, and it's kind of obvious when you look at it, is it's probably, there'll be some orgs that, that Plan 2 does make sense for. But for orgs that want more Intune capabilities in Intune, I think it's fair to say that Intune Suite is going to be the better option, even though it's going to cost more. People are going to look at things like this and go, okay, well, okay, I looked at remote help and standalone. Let's be blunt, for a lot of people, the pricing did not compute. So they're going, okay, well, if I can get that bundled in with MTM, maybe I still need some of that specialized device management, but also then getting things like the advanced endpoint analytics. Now, notice here that they just sort of talk, that it's not the list of everything that's becoming available. So with this one, they're sort of just saying, look, here's what's there for now. And it kind of makes sense that they don't include the endpoint privilege management in here because it's just a preview feature that anyone can enable without having to go down the Intune Suite path. I guess at this point in time, like it would have been something they could have put in here and said coming soon or in public preview. But for now, I think it's more a matter of here are the things you'd actually be paying for. Now that brings up like a pretty big conversation. Because if we jump over and take a look at, okay, well, what do we get? What are we getting if we sign up for, for Intune Suite now? Okay, well, we're not getting the advanced app management. We're not getting the cloud certificate management. So for some orgs, they'd be looking at this going, well, it doesn't really make sense for me to go all the way over to Intune Suite until those other capabilities become available, especially if we've got the privileged management in open preview for anyone to try out. To me, it kind of seems like right now it's almost like there's not a lot of pressure on people to really go down that Intune Suite path just yet. But as the extra pieces start to light up, obviously it will make more sense. But I'm guessing though that it's, depending on what which of the other new features become available as standalone add-ins, I could also see that, this is one of those scenarios where maybe people just sort of pick and choose a la carte as opposed to going down the Intune Suite, at least until more of the Intune Suite is actually available. So it's kind of weird in general. And I know Steve probably doesn't want to comment on this one, and Quok probably doesn't, but it's just kind of weird that a suite has launched without some of its capabilities, but they're talking about them coming. Whereas if they said, here's what the suite is, and everyone just said, okay, well, based on what's in there currently, but without any kind of future. Steve, you do want to say something?
I'm going to say something that you're going to sit there and go, but you have to remember when System Center Suite first came out, how many products was in it?
See, but for me, though, it's more a matter of
what's
in it versus what's being promoted as being. Yeah, no. So
when System Center first came out, there was 3 products. There was Config Manager, well, SMS got rebranded into Config Manager. There was MOM, that that got rebranded into System Center Operations Manager. And then the third one, does anybody remember what the third one was?
Was it?
Intune.
Wasn't Orchestration Manager or
No.
Virtual Machine Manager?
No. Reporting Services.
No.
See, but here's the difference, though, is that did they promote it at launch?
Yes.
Based on
they promoted
unreleased products.
Yes, they promoted Service Manager at launch for System Center Suite and a couple of other things. So
there's someone floating around in this team who thought it was a good idea then and still thinks it's a good idea now.
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not committing either way. I'm just showing that there was precedent.
Yeah, but it's like, whereas if it was something where they said, here's what it is, and people looked at it and said, without saying here's what's coming in the future. Now, I guess the other thing as well is that, reasons why they, like it's easy to sort of figure out some of the reasons why they would promote stuff that's coming. So if there are big customers whose EA renewals are coming up, etc., getting them signed up this year or this cycle versus next cycle or whatever, I can kind of see it from that side where it's, and also as a way to potentially discourage people from going down a third-party solution path and then finding it harder to come back into the fold. But it's definitely something that's not. It's like adding things into suites. Just look at Office 365 or Microsoft 365 and all the stuff that's been added over the years. But that's something, and that's a different situation. Whereas in this case, it's we've got stuff coming, but we're not going to give you any good timeframes on it just yet.
Yeah, I mean the other fun thing about at least one of those things that is coming is there's been documentation that's been floated to the public and immediately being redacted almost immediately for the last 2 years. It is not. It is the other one that I'm not going to publicly talk about a great deal. But so, this has been worked on for quite some time. And the attempt to announce it has been floated and stymied almost immediately at least 3 times in the last couple of years that I can confidently say was probably an accident, but it was public, so I guess we can talk about it.
Yeah, so it's and probably even the other thing here is that and this is these will be some of the challenges where calling something in advance, like advanced app management, people's imaginations are going to run wild with what they think that is, versus when it ships, obviously it's not going to be the all singing, all dancing, covering every single feature that every single customer has. So no doubt we'll sort of see, more detail, or more public information about what can be, what it will do, what its initial goals are. But it's a bit of a weird situation though, where you do have, things, it's like that. And I'm always wary about, and this is probably more of a hardware thing than a software thing, but I guess it applies to software just as equally. But I'm always a little bit concerned when a hardware vendor goes, and we'll add this capability at this point in the future. And then people buy that hardware, or let's say they buy that hardware or software, but then then the direction of that product changes and it never actually meets the requirement of the person who bought it based on one of those original promises. That's for me, it's just sort of one of the concerns. And probably it's not the best example, because I thought it was stupid that people got upset about it. But who remembers Windows Ultimate Extras, or Windows Vista Ultimate Extras, and how upset some people got about the lack of Ultimate Extras that actually shipped? I think was there a total of 0 Ultimate Extras that shipped, and look, the reality was that was a situation where it was. So you're talking about Vista Ultimate. So first of all, Vista had no market share. Ultimate would have been the smallest section of Vista sales. So for there to be so much complaining about it, it's like, well, it must have been the same 5 people signing in under different names in different forums and commenting on different blogs. But again, it was that promise of things that are coming in the future that didn't eventuate. Now, I'm not suggesting that these won't eventuate. It's probably just more a matter of, people, maybe people committing based on what they think it's going to be versus what things end up being. That's probably, that's a risk that I think the team is taking by doing that. Now, it could turn out to be a positive. They could over deliver what people expect. So, so that's definitely a possibility there, but just sort of something to be, a little bit, wary of with those. Okay, so just over here then, so I think did I paste that link into chat as well? I did. And then just the final one that I just wanted to drop in for this one was that if we take a look at the M365 roadmap and just take a look at Intune, things like advanced endpoint analytics is actually in here, but there was something else. So this is not related to tonight's conversation. I think this might be a next month conversation, is if this is accurate, we should finally be able to cover the Intune-based driver and firmware management capabilities next month. So that was something that was announced, I think, March 2021. So this has been kind of, so Microsoft has been talking about this since I think that first Ignite of 2021. So thankfully, this is something that hopefully we finally get, a public preview of it. But just going back to some of the other, Intune Suite things that were in there. So there was the advanced endpoint analytics. What else? There were a couple of other things in here as well. So EPM is in here, but obviously that's currently in preview. The the tunnel for Android, tunnel for iOS. So they're in preview anyway. And then I think there was something else on this last slide, or maybe not. Okay, but sort of just showing there that some of those, some of the things that we're sort of covering here, that even though they haven't shipped, that at least at least some of them are things that are actually in a roadmap. Now, putting them in a roadmap doesn't necessarily make them real, but it makes them a bit more real to me anyway than something where there's no commitment yet around those timeframes. Okay, so let's jump in and just a couple of slides now. Let me just sort of build this one out just so we can sort of see a few things. So there's a few talking points. I don't want to talk to most of the talking points that are actually the official talking points on here. I want to sort of talk around some of what's here. And probably like one of the things that is really nice about some of the technologies that are in the Intune Suite is that the Intune team didn't go and reinvent the wheel for some of these things. So with things like endpoint privilege management, the Intune team didn't go through and say, hey, how do we track what processes are being used when an app is launching? They could reach out to the log analytics team. They could reach out to the Defender for Endpoint team for that kind of information. Like other things there, such as, obviously, basically, Microsoft Graph integration, etc. So really for me here, it's the, leveraging other Microsoft teams. So even if they're not directly leveraging their technology, they know, basically they get the information, they know what to look for. So for me, I sort of view that as a big positive because it means that we should see consistency around the way that things are being reported. So whether you're using Intune, whether you're using like Defender for Cloud or using Sentinel, for example, a lot of the same kind of, things that you'll see in one environment will show up pretty much, not necessarily looking identical, but there'll be a lot of carryover in those. So that's something that I think is a much better approach versus in years gone by where every one of these teams would have gone through and done their own thing and built it from scratch, and it would have been completely different from everything else that Microsoft did.
Yeah.
So that was a huge positive for me.
I think having Graph as the sort of the central framework for all of these different disparate product stacks really forces everyone to play by the rules. They don't have to, but if they want actual market share involvement, I'm not looking at anyone in particular. Then leveraging Graph is going to be a good way to do that because there's a lot of there's a lot of community love for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the other thing that caught my attention on this slide was down here. Instead of having Defender for endpoint, they've actually got Defender for business. So I don't know if that's a typo or if it's they're deliberately calling out specific integration with the small business version of Defender. So I'll sort of have to dig into that to see if it's kind of a deliberate thing and the reason why I'm sort of saying that is Defender for Business actually shows some different things versus what you'd see if you were just using P1 or P2 of Defender for Endpoint. So I'm kind of curious if they're actually showing some differences over in that custom portal that they've. It's not a custom portal. It's just got some custom views within that portal.
Is this the on-prem installation for small business server?
Oh no, I don't think there's any on-prem. So basically, yes, a small business server has been resurrected.
Nice. Okay.
No,
that's all I wanted to hear.
It has. No. Okay, so with that, let's jump on in to probably the one that we sort of mentioned that we'd sort of be spending the most time on here, which is the endpoint privilege management. Now, again, I've got a few links that I'll sort of drop in so that those of you who sort of want to, dig into some of the things that we're talking about in a bit more detail. Let's start off with, just grab the browser session again. I'll close those even though I know I'm going to need them again in 3 minutes. So let's drop this one into chat. Okay, so the first one in here is from Matt, who Steve did what was it, like a week or two ago, you published the video with Matt. So I highly recommend you watch that video. Steve's being very quiet here, but it would be very worth your while looking at that if EPM is something that you've got any interest in, some of the capabilities that maybe haven't been discussed openly in other cases. That's me trying to be subtle and just not succeeding at all. So basically, like taking a look at what's in there, but also this is an important one as well, is just the things here around what's actually needed to go through and use endpoint privilege management, because there are some things in here such as, again, let me just sort of zoom in so we can get rid of the sidebar, but things where there may be specific patches that need to, or sorry, I shouldn't say patches, updates that need to be applied separately to devices in order to get them to work. Now, I think what we were sort of seeing as we were looking through some things before we kicked the session off is that it looks like a lot of what is kind of being listed here is I think it was April updates where it was showing that the April cumulative update for at least some of these had basically removed this requirement. But just be careful here if you're trying to go through, and just let me sort of show you quickly what I mean by this is, we'll explain what this is a little bit later on. But effectively in here, you can see that like I've got one machine in here that's showing up, and it's basically saying that the endpoint privilege management does not apply to this virtual machine. So what it's basically telling me is that there's a system requirement that's not being met. So basically, it can't detect. I don't know why, because it's a patched VM, but for some reason it can't detect that it has been updated. So if you see not applicable, obviously that's quite different here to error. I have to try to figure out what the hell went on with that one, because as far as I'm aware, that one should also be working, but it's giving me a different error message. But at least in here, I can show you what the 3 different levels of check-in status are. And I will pretend that I've got that like this deliberately, not that it was done by accident to show the 3 different statuses that we've got. I did it. I planned it all out in advance. I deliberately misconfigured a couple of VMs to do that.
It's so you have the green, red, and blue along the top.
Exactly. Yeah. So that loan article goes through a bunch of stuff, including basics around. We'll cover some of this stuff in detail here. But going through talking about some of the different permissions, etc., that you need, there are obviously anything management or security related. There are going to be roles related, new roles created in here as well. So we've got endpoint privilege management policy authoring, endpoint privilege manager, endpoint privilege reader. So again, those of you who sort of want to sort of lock things down, you're definitely going to be able to do that in here as well. So let's just talk about a few of the things on the slide, just as some talking points, and then we can jump in and spend a bit of time demonstrating over here. So as we're going through, actually probably just the most important thing to kick off with here is just to talk about what endpoint privilege management is. So the thing not to confuse it with is, like, don't confuse it with privileged identity management or things similar to PIM. Because with PIM, you're going through and basically giving somebody or assigning role permissions for X amount of time. But in this case, you're really being more specific, saying, here are executables that you can run if the organization actually wants you to run them. So in some ways, it's more like privileged access management in Exchange Online, where it's more of a task-based approach. So it's like, you don't need to be an Exchange admin to perform this task. We can just use PAM and give you permission to perform that one specific task. And that's pretty much like a very similar thing here. Now, I guess the difference here is that, like, this is not, I don't think this has got any kind of time-based restrictions. It's if the app is open, you've got those permissions. If the app closes, you lose those permissions. So you'll get to see, it's pretty easy to go through and set it up. And probably this is something that, once you start taking a look at it, it's actually, there's like, in terms of what configuration options you've got, it's actually pretty simple overall, as long as you're following a couple of basic rules and not accidentally exposing way more than you mean to. And for the demonstration, I'll show you what we mean by that. So in here, if we take a look, automatic user confirmed or support approved elevation. So with automatic, is it something where it's like, okay, that's an app that we know users are going to need to open all the time. So do we really want to bug them for their credentials? Do we want to bug them for, basically to log reasons why they're, why they need access to it? Or do we just want the app to open? Now, in some cases, we may need that automatic option because there may be some apps that we just need to run as an admin. So in this case, there'll be some use cases there, but others where it's basically where the user has to sort of support, provide more information, at least so that you can get an idea of, is it something that's actually more broadly needed across the organization? Now, some other things in here is that the way that it works is when we go through and enable it, the devices or the users that we're targeting, they'll get the capability pushed out to those devices. Now, if you temporarily disable the capability to use EPM, it doesn't trigger a mass uninstall of that agent from all the devices. Instead, it's got a 7-day cooling down period. So if you just need to turn it off for troubleshooting purposes, you don't then have to go, hang on, is that going to cause a bunch of uninstalls? Is it going to make machines restart or anything like that? So no, unless you leave it off for more than 7 days, then it will do the uninstall. And in terms of the flexibility here, as I mentioned, we're basically targeting, we can target devices or, groups of devices, or we can target groups of users. So pretty easy, approach there. Now, if we then take a look at some of the other pieces in terms of what's coming through, so notice that I didn't specifically talk about the support approved elevation. And the reason for that is that is not something I can show you tonight. That's something that is coming. So that's where, and I think if we go back to some of the earlier demos of this that you probably saw, I'm pretty sure that the support approved elevation was in some of the earlier public demonstration, maybe on mechanics videos or something like that. I could be confusing where the videos were that I saw on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's something that has been discussed publicly. Now, other things in here is requiring MFA for elevation. Obviously that's a very, very good option to have. And then the other thing here is around predefined elevation templates. So what are things that basically every tenant is going, or nearly every tenant is going to have to create for themselves? So rather than sort of having everyone go out and create their own, let's just put in some predefined templates and start working with those. And if we switch over now, just so we can sort of start working through it. So I guess then the first thing here is that like we've basically it's just here. So under endpoint security, we've got endpoint privilege management. So if you haven't enabled it in your tenant, it's just a matter of enabling it, and within a short time, you'll be able to just go through and start creating policies. Now, the first policy that you need to create is a settings policy. Now, let me just sort of quickly show you here. So when we're creating policies, we can either create rules policies or settings policies. But in order to have rules policies apply, we actually need to have a settings policy first. So if we jump in and just take a look at the setting policy that I've got in here, then we can just take a look at some of the different options that are in here. So first of all, obviously we need to have endpoint privilege management enabled, but this is where we can just go through and disable it if we need to do that temporarily. So send elevation data for reporting, yes. Now, one of the things that it looks like, and I'm sure it's probably in the documentation somewhere, is it seems like the elevation data for reporting doesn't come through immediately. Now, I don't know if it's just because I've only just set it up in this tenant, or if it's whether once it sort of starts reporting, then it comes through at a quicker speed. But I think if we check reports, you'll see that at least before the session, there was nothing populated in there. Now, for the reporting scope, what is it that you actually want? So do you just want diagnostic data? Do you want do you want to add all of the endpoint elevation? So this is where someone is going through and doing another kind of endpoint elevation or attempt at endpoint elevation. So basically right mouse clicking and saying run as admin, as opposed to the process that you'll see in a moment for using managed elevations. So in this case, just choosing all, because if there are things that people are trying to do or are succeeding at that are falling outside of the scope of your managed elevations, maybe there's things you want to consider managing as well in the future. Maybe discovering that you may have some users with a few more permissions than they are supposed to. Now down here, I've just set the default elevation response to deny all requests. So effectively what this means is that if no policies match what I'm trying, so if none of the other policies that I create match and allow what I'm trying to do, then the default response here is going to be to deny everything else. Now we can actually go through and choose require user confirmation, which basically means that, like, effectively, I think we could sort of view this as we're going into more of an audit mode here, where we're saying we'll allow it to happen, but we'll say that we want a business justification, and we'll also force you to go down the Windows authentication path for that. So I sort of think of this, if we were enabling it and then applying this pretty much to everyone or to the pilot users, it's more that we're just doing it to gather information, because effectively, this is going to allow things to work, even if we don't have a policy that matches. So I won't actually save those changes. But the final thing here is not configured. Now, the reason why there's not configured in here is just in case you're managing this another way, so you're pushing the settings out through another solution. This way, just trying to avoid any kind of conflict with the settings that you've got. But for this one, I've just got it set to deny all requests. So once we've got that enabled, then that's where we get to, I guess, what people really think is going to be what you're actually doing. Now, you'll notice that I've given this one a stupid name, Word++, and you'll get to see why. I was going to call it, I can't believe it's not Word, but
plus plus.
Word++ will do. The plus will make a lot more sense as we go through.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just take a look at some of the things in here before we jump in. So we can use scope tags. Now, some of the things that, actually, no, I'm going to leave that to Matt in the video. I'm not going to say the thing I was about to say because I don't know if it's public or not. Do you know what I'm talking about, Steve? Just say it out loud.
No.
Huh? No. I'm about to say something that I probably shouldn't. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say it or not, so I'll just avoid the topic. But there's kind of something that, if you look at this, you go, hey, it would be really cool if was in here. Is that a good way to put it? Now, okay, so you can target. So again, remember, we can target users or we can target devices. Usual logic about which one makes sense for you kicks in there. Now, if we jump in and take a look at the configuration settings, this is really where things definitely get more interesting. So first of all, we could go through and put different settings under one of these profiles. So if I wanted to go through and put a new one in alongside, what I've got in here. So if I just wanted to have a profile that applied to a particular group of users, rather than having, a profile for each app, instead it would be something where I could just go through and group everything together. Now, let's just call this one, say, Excel. Because if I'm allowing Word, I probably should allow Excel as well. Now, for elevation type, this is where you can see the user confirmed versus automatic. Once again, you'll see the different business validation, or the options there for validation. But once we get down here, this is where you start to see, okay, how can we make sure that the file is the file that we actually say it is? So the default thing here that I think is definitely going to catch some people out until they realize what's going on here is that some people go, oh, it looks like I have to use a certificate. It's a really good idea to use a certificate. It's more than a good idea. It's the best practice to use a certificate here. But you can go through and actually just sort of say not configured. So you might have something that's not, hopefully not the case, but you might have something that's not signed. But let's assume that, that you do have that. Now notice here that we've got two different options here for signature source. So if I've got, so let's say with this example, and the reason why I chose Excel here, what's the likelihood that let's go back to upload a certificate file and come down here to certificate type. What XPs are going to have the same publisher certificate as Word? That's a pretty big list of Microsoft products in there. So in this case, rather than doing it just through publisher or on an app by app basis, instead what we can do here is effectively say, let's create basically a certificate, or a reusable certificate. So basically, let's just create a pointer or a reference for that certificate, and then we can refer all of these apps that are in here that need to use that same certificate to that one certificate. Now, obviously for configuration of all of this, it means we're not going through and dropping in the file hash over and over and over again. But the other benefit is if we need to, like if a certificate gets revoked, rather than going through and having to revoke and basically put the new certificate into all 300 things that might fall under Microsoft apps, you can just do it in one location.
Okay.
Now obviously here you've got to be careful with what you're doing here. So let's just go back down to go to the option of upload a cert file. The thing that you really don't want to do here is just go through and say, file name, file path, and signature, and that's all you're checking on. So things like your file hash, minimum versions, etc., are other things you probably should be looking at in here. But obviously with things like the file hash, then in that case, it's something where especially here if we're talking about Office updates, making sure that they do stay, that you're keeping those up to date. And but if we take
Mark, do you know what file hash it's after? Is it the SHA-1, SHA-256?
Not too sure. I haven't looked at the documentation for that one.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's obviously, So then for the certs, it's just going through the regular. Well, let me just open something up on my other screen and move it across. Of course, I got rid of the thing I needed. I'll use a different example over here. I'll pander to an audience of one. Oh, look at this.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
You know who the audience of one now is, Ben, don't you?
Not me.
Okay.
Come on.
So if we jump into, so basically here, just like on the Patch My PC XE, and we jump into details, jump into view certificate, and basically from here, just copy. The process here is we just copy out to file, choose base 64, and basically follow the bouncing ball. Once it's
we've actually got a
exported,
really neat PowerShell script that'll extract the certificate from any executable on your machine, because they're they're not. It doesn't matter whether you can extract the certificate. You can't really do much with it other than validate the security of it. So if there's anyone that's interested in that, I'm more than happy to share that certificate extraction script.
Yeah, because you don't want to have to do that manually.
No, it sucks, and you shouldn't be using GUIs for this sort of stuff.
Yeah, like there's no chance that somebody could actually choose the wrong certificate type to export or anything along those lines. So basically in here, populating as much as you can to minimize, like, especially if it's something where someone's got, might have, being able to rename an exe in a folder they've got permissions on, or things along those lines. Now, in the example that I've got in here, the word plus, like, I've deliberately made that one as weak as, or I'm not, I could have made it weaker, but I made it pretty weak, just so that you can see that even though I'm there going, okay, well, I've got the certificate for Word, I've added it in, let's say, actually, I'll show you the Windows auth, because that one does some interesting things. But notice in here that all I've got is the certificate, and I'm basically not prompting for anything else. So the reason why I've called it Word++ is, like, this is going to work against anything that same Microsoft certificate has been applied to, or has signed. So this is something that, if someone's, I guess what you've got to be careful of here is, you don't want to go too broad and go, well, hang on, I could just call this rule name Microsoft, so that someone could go through, and this would allow anything from Microsoft that was signed by that, and there's a lot that's signed by that. Like, any of that stuff would open. And while you might go, hey, that sounds really convenient, there is going to be a ton of stuff down on someone's PC that you do not want them opening up.
Yeah.
So you've just sort of be somewhat careful here. So this example is, oops, that's not what I wanted. So the example that I've got here.
Sorry, Mark, the other thing to throw in there is, don't just put in like the DigiCert root level certificate.
Yeah.
Yes, it will make it so you can do your whole environment and you can run any process, but it means any process signed by that certificate or any subordinate of that will run without any problems.
Yeah, I can't foresee any issues with that one whatsoever. But someone's going to try it. Like, they'll try it in testing just to make sure and go, oh yeah, that's really good, that works, and then forget about it, and then wondering why people just open up almost anything down on their devices.
I'm sure people have already deployed it to production.
Yes. Oh, don't say things like that. Okay, so in this case, it's a matter of, like, if we take a look here at what I've actually created in this case, what would have been a better approach for that one would have been, rather than just sort of targeting Word, was to say, okay, well, this is for Microsoft apps signed by this, and in comments or description, signed by this particular one. So something that I can use to ID, the cert that was used there. And then just going through and choosing the appropriate Microsoft apps that I want it to apply to, as we get into, basically going through and putting in the additional rules that we've got underneath that. So so that way, and then I guess the other thing as well is that, using the, basically, let's jump back in, the reusable settings. So this is a pretty much, I want to call it, it's not a certificate repository. Let's call it a certificate settings or certificate details repository. Might be I've got to come up with a better term, because just saying reusable settings, people may not really know what that is. But if we just sort of jump in and type in, and we jump in, it's basically, all you can see here is that, it's basically saying, okay, what is that certificate that you want to use over and over? So using that against, all of those Microsoft apps we want people to be able to run as an admin. Now, I don't know why you'd want to run Word or Excel or whatever as an admin, but maybe other system level utilities that some people may need admin permission on. That's really where this stuff starts to make.
So you can run the macro that you downloaded off the internet.
Yeah.
Well, a good example, Mark, would be Visual Studio. So you don't have to give your developers admin privileges, but they can still update Visual Studio, install plugins and extensions and things like that.
Okay, so seeing that there's, like, there's not a huge amount more in terms. So basically, that's it in terms of the different settings. So it's really the combination of the settings. So in this case, even though I've called this default settings, this is not tenant-wide default settings. So just sort of be careful there, where in some Microsoft 365 services where settings is something that applies to the entire tenant. Well, I guess it technically does apply to the tenant, but then you get to pick and choose which groups it actually applies to. But if I wanted to go through and create another group of, let's say,
I got to bounce, guys. Sorry.
Policy. Okay, see you, Ben.
Bye.
I'll call it even more default settings. Then I can go through and basically, maybe I've got a different group of pilot users or users internally that I want to treat differently. Then it's, again, based on scope and based on assignment, that can then determine who it actually gets rolled out to. So you don't need to apply that same default logic to everyone in the organization. Now, the final thing in the UI, which it's not showing up yet because I only sort of built this tenant out earlier today, is you'll see that none of the reporting is coming through yet about who has done what. So I'm guessing that either 2 minutes after we wrap up tonight or in about 20 hours, it's one of those two options where that data will start to filter through. But overall, it's quite simple in terms of the settings, etc. But obviously, you can see where the complexity is going to kick in terms of like how you actually create those different policies and settings. Okay, so let's just sort of quickly switch over here just to sort of demonstrate a working environment with a few of those things. So right now, one of the challenges that you've got with Windows 11 is that the menu shortcut that you want doesn't actually appear here, but that's something that is coming. We've been told it's coming. I don't think we've had a time frame around that. But if I then choose show more options down here, you'll see we've got run with elevated access. So this is where enterprise endpoint privilege management kicks in, and you basically can see here that it's telling me that I can't run this app as an admin, and it's like, obviously these kinds of attempts are going to be tracked, and then it's like, oh, okay, why would you need access to 7-zip? And it could be because you've got some certain hidden folders, etc., that you need to get access to compress things. Now, if we jump in and try the same thing on Word, now I guess I could just right mouse click, hit Shift and right mouse click and get straight to run with elevated access. Now in this, oh, did I disable that? Let me try this one. Did I mess up my rules? I had this working before we kicked off. What did I do?
More than likely.
Ah. Okay, so I changed something in my settings that's causing that to change. Okay, let's just do a quick and dirty fix. I don't think I'll actually call this a fix. Let's just pretend this is going to be this is not troubleshooting. This is just brute forcing it. Let's pretend I didn't do what we just saw. I wonder how long it's going to take for those settings to come down. It's probably going to take a few minutes for that to happen.
Just restart the computer.
Now, I'm being overly optimistic first. So this is one of the other things that I don't think is anywhere in the documentation, is what can you do to trigger a synchronization of these policies? Because even though we're managing it through Intune, I think it's fair to say that it's not actually Intune doing this. So this is
Mark.
Yeah.
I believe there is a different agent for that. For the
Yeah.
endpoint
Oh, yeah.
privilege.
Yeah. So the thing there is that it's who did it sign me in as? Let me sign out as that one. That is not the user I want it to be. On earth. That is. Don't tell me that restart just recent. Okay, let's try that again. No, it hasn't. Okay, so it hasn't synced yet. But effectively in here, what you'll like with the options that I've got set in there now, what it will do, I've got it set to do a dual prompt. So it's going to prompt, I have to sort of type in the business justification, and then it's also going to ask me to re-verify my credentials just to make sure that it's actually me doing that. So that re-verifying your credentials, that's where you can sort of see where the MFA element is going to be a very, very nice way of enforcing that. Now, I might just sort of leave that running in the background just so we can check in on it a little bit later. I'm still optimistic. So it's thinking. Yeah, let's just get that out of the way. Okay, so that was really where we wanted to spend like most of the time. And it's, so right now it's something that's pretty easy to go through and configure. But as you can see, it's also something where someone could easily misconfigure something and maybe allow too many apps to work versus what they should or shouldn't allow to run. Now, before we move on from this one, any questions from anyone? Now, I haven't been watching chat, so I'll jump back into chat to see if there's anything in there. So Arish, just sort of looking at your comments, so you were getting the just that error comment without it, as opposed to it, or giving you as a success or fail status.
That's right. I was just getting that in my tenant. However, patching has gone by this weekend. Let me go ahead and check my tenant again.
So the other thing as well for me to check with you, is this in a W365 machine, in a cloud PC?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So that's the other thing. So I had to switch away. I don't know why, but I had to switch away from cloud PC to a local VM to get it to work. But so I don't know. But that could just be something completely on my side. So I'm not willing to say that there's some kind of conflict there. That because I didn't have time to investigate it, but it'd be curious to see if it's the same there for you. Oh, okay. So it's not supported.
I think if two people are facing the same thing, then maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and now Quok's just typed into chat that it's not supported. Okay, so Quok, thanks for not telling me that this morning when I wasted a few hours trying to figure out what was going on.
Very
important
helpful.
lesson. Important lesson. Of course I didn't ask. I thought I could just sort of brute force my way through it. Okay, so that is definitely good to know. Okay, so let's then continue on, just so we don't need to sort of spend too much time on some of these others, but we'll just sort of go through them pretty quickly. So with the advanced endpoint analytics, probably the important things here is around being able to start targeting subsets of devices to start really investigating what's going on. So that's probably the big initial thing for most people who are going to be using this. So rather than getting that overall reporting across all the different device types, etc., instead starting to just sort of look a bit more closely at potentially the problematic machines, or the machines that have got anomalies in them. Now, where things get interesting moving forward, though, is where it's basically, starting to leverage AI, basically looking for additional troubleshooting issues, troubleshooting solutions for what could help you out there. But it's and also mobile app insights is coming as well. Now with these again, you've sort of seen that for the advanced endpoint analytics, a few of these things are already future things are already in the M365 roadmap. So it means that things are shaking up there. Now this one with the Microsoft tunnel, probably the main thing I just sort of want to talk about with this one is I've seen quite a few comments in different forums where people are getting a bit confused about what this is, and they're going, well, doesn't Microsoft already have doesn't Intune already have tunneling? But really here the difference is that we're talking about using app level tunneling. So rather than it being entire device, getting a VPN connection, in this case, it's like, just that app that is establishing the tunnel. So that's probably just that's the big thing with this one. And probably just in terms of how it works, down here, things like with Android, you need to have company portal, and with iOS, there's no sign-in required. So some differences in terms of how it treats different mobile platforms there. So is anyone on the call playing around with this already? Or probably a better starting point for the question, is anyone using mobile app management, either standalone or alongside MDM?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. So we got a yeah there.
Yeah, we are using the customer mobile application management. So.
Yeah. Okay.
But without tunneling.
So that's the next step then for you. That's an H2 project. Okay, so yeah, so with this one, and I guess this is just sort of really like for me is that, and the reason why I was asking about the MAM usage, or at least standalone MAM usage, was, has it changed where early on I was seeing that a lot of orgs were getting really excited about MAM, but within a short time frame, they were getting excited about MAM for BYOD scenarios, but within a short time frame, they just said everyone enrolls any device, personal or work, with Intune or whatever MDM solution. Is that still something that you see on a regular basis where people just go, look, it's easier for us to go down the MDM path because that way we're just doing it all once, as opposed to thinking, how do we do it for BYOD versus corporate issued? Any comments from anyone around that, just in terms of any changes they've seen in their market?
I think it's really depending on the fact if the employee is getting a phone or a mobile device, in this case, from the company. And then you will go to fully MDM with probably MOM as well. But for the bring your own, for the external people, for example, then you can make use of the MOM.
Yeah.
From bring your own devices.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things where, like generally speaking, European countries do this a lot better than other places in the world, where there's that nice separation between, this is a personal device, you can't ask me to do anything work related on it. Whereas a lot of other places, it's like, just do it. It's a requirement of your job.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a big difference between Europe or America or Australia. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so up next we've got advanced app management. So with this one, it's where like a couple of the, I guess let's take a look at some of the important pieces on here. So securely hosted app catalog. So this is not like it's not like some of the other things that we've discussed in other sessions where, the potential for, potentially hosting your own app repository, basically app repositories, etc. This is something where effectively it's a Microsoft curated app environment. So obviously there'll be Microsoft apps in there, but there's also will be, what are the customer or what apps are the ones that customers are demanding be made available. So some of the things that, with this is effectively just sort of, having, an environment where there's more, a lot more control over the, version to version updating, etc. And again, things like where it's basically you don't have to use the UI, you can go through, use Graph API for everything. You don't need to go through and and basically wrap it up with an installer, that kind of thing. So this is one where there's so far there's been very little. At least at this point in time, there's very little public information on this one. And I think for a lot of the people who look at Intune Suite, this is probably one of the ones that I think once this one gets added in, this is one of the ones that I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will sort of sit up and go, okay, is this something that's worth investigating here for us? Now, I guess the other thing as well is once again, going back to just the use of the term advanced app management. Now, who knows what the final naming of it is going to be? Maybe it is Windows Advanced App Management, but I don't know, calling something advanced when you're a new entrant in that market is, there's a word I want to use, but I'll say gutsy instead. So this is something that, I guess some of the challenges that we'll have here is that, orgs are still going to have their random apps that are never going to appear in this. So whether it's something, it could be commercial software that just doesn't meet the bar for going in here. So even if people are, people who are using this, there's still going to have to be, some line of business apps, etc. Anything, that they're creating internally that's not really going to be part of that hosted app catalog that you've got there. And it expands. Excellent. Okay, so let me just check. Okay, so last slide then before we just jump over to the general conversation piece. So I sort of just threw this one in last because this is the one that, this one's been available, it's been GA for quite a while now. But probably, I'd say Intune Suite is probably the thing that's going to drive usage of, usage of remote help. Steve?
Can I add one thing in here that I think a lot of people miss is the second last bullet point on the bigger list being the ServiceNow incident details. That allows you to do a direct integration with ServiceNow from Intune, but you do need remote help to be able to do that.
And is ServiceNow kind of just the default solution for a lot of orgs? Would it be fair to say that?
It is predominantly available and used by most organizations. Is probably the safest statement we could say.
Okay, so again, with the remote help, again, just because it's available doesn't mean they're not adding additional capabilities. So things like conditional access integration capability. So obviously still being developed there. So with that, that's a video. I don't want to hate playing videos. So with that, so those of you who haven't attended previously, normally this is where we stop the recording because there might be some things based on what you've seen that you don't necessarily want recorded, or there might be some other topics you want to cover off that you don't want recorded. So let me just stop the recording now, just so that we can switch into that mode. So if there's anything that you didn't want a permanent record of in a recording, I'll just stop the recording.